In a landscape dominated by multiplayer first-person shooters, endless side quests and lifeless NPCs, one overlooked mechanic could inspire a new wave of innovative game design, sawing. But before that, we need to dive briefly into the history of Fabric. If you take your eyes off this video and look down, you will see that your body is encased in cloth. At least I am assuming that you are not naked. Perhaps you are sitting on the cushion seat of a car, train or bus, or in a very comfortable sofa. Fabrics have changed, defined, advanced and shaped the world we live in, and they did the same once they were introduced in video games. In the early days of gaming, fabric barely existed beyond a few colored pixels. A cape was just a red rectangle attached to a character sprite. Clothes, flags and curtains were static textures painted onto rigid models because the hardware simply could not handle movement. But as technology evolved, developers became obsessed with making cloth feel believable. During the late 90s and early 2000s, fabric physics started appearing everywhere. Capes began to flow behind heroes and characters' clothing moved independently from their bodies. Suddenly, cloth was no longer decoration, but simulation. Then came another shift. The customization of the characters we played as enabled something called freedom of expression. It started feeling like a future that must be included by devs, players spending hours choosing outfits for their characters. Later, games such as Unravel literally built movement and storytelling around fabric, turning sawing concepts into traversal systems, emotional symbolism, and puzzle design. And today, with the realistic cloth simulation powered by physics engines and GPUs capable of rendering every wrinkle in a jacket or a dress. Yet, sawing is still barely explored as a gameplay mechanic. At first glance, sawing sounds like the least video game-ish activity imaginable, but if we think from a game designer's perspective, you could build a video game around it. If you break it down, and I'm not talking about the stitches, sawing already contains almost everything that makes games satisfying. It includes precision mechanics, being full of small skill-based actions that could easily translate into gameplay. Cutting fabric accurately could be turned into a rhythm slicing game. The player could be rewarded based on stitch alignment and timing. Reading sawing petals is one of the closest resemblances to solving a puzzle. The need to visualize 2D shapes becoming 3D objects, understanding the order of what you are assembling, optimizing the material usage and rotating and fitting pieces efficiently would give people the satisfaction of puzzle game with the creativity of building something. I already briefly touched on the fact that fabric is not infinite. There is also the fact that different materials don't act, feel, cost, or resist the same. With this in mind, suddenly clothing is no longer cosmetic and it could turn in a resource management gameplay. You want to use cheap fabric for your armor because you want to save more for other items? That could come at the risk of your armor tearing easier under stress. Heavier materials could slow your character's movement. Handmade repairs that would replace the trader's repairs could increase the equipment's durability. Most games treat customization as selecting pre-made skins from a menu. But there are also others that allow players to choose the fabric of their clothes, and only this unlocks a whole new level of freedom. For example, in certain games like the WWE 2K series, where that freedom combined with an online community, there are people that download that game mostly to create instead of playing it. If you think about it, sawing already fits existing genres, such as survival games with their crafting and repair mechanics, RPGs for armor tailoring and stat customization, even horror games for tension-based repair mechanics. So we can agree the sawing already contains almost everything that makes games satisfying, but what about the untapped mechanics of sawing? Most crafting systems in games are basically some simple fusion menus. You collect 5 pieces of leather, 2 metal scraps, press a button and suddenly you have a fully formed jacket, backpack or armor piece. But sawing does not work like that. Sawing is not just combining items, it is construction on the level of the stitches. It's the act of turning separate, fragile pieces into something that holds together under pressure. The player would not simply choose craft jacket, they would have to decide where the seams go, how dense the stitches are, what type of stitch to use, where to reinforce the material and the materials you use to reinforce the item. A straight stitch might be fast, simple and cheap, but weaker under stress. A zigzag stitch could allow for stretch, reinforced seams could make an item last longer, but consume more thread and time. There could be decorative stitches that could increase the social appeal of the character. The possibilities are limitless. Suddenly there is the opportunity for every item in the game to be unique after being crafted or repaired. At the end of the game, all the repaired and crafted items will become the history of the player's decisions. Stitch level construction, replacing the crafting menus, would create a relationship between the fabric, the materials, the items and the player, and if there is one thing that people love the most, that is personalization. That being taken to another level of this mechanic idea. Another possible mechanic sewing could inspire is the idea of living garments. Most games treat clothing as disposable items. You progress through levels and you need to either change your gear entirely or upgrade your current gear with little to no visible changes. Imagine a game where the coat you begin with looks so cool that you would love to keep it, but just see a few changes to it as you progress. With every level, not only its stats would get higher, but you would either start seeing changes to it, or you would have the option with each level to add hand-stitched symbols, patches, pockets and many other things that would tell a personalized story of your character's journey. This is interesting because the progression becomes visible and now you have emotional attachment to that item. At your max level, you are not anymore stronger through your invisible numbers, but you can see the change in your clothes. And this whole new mechanic would feel much closer to how handmade objects feel in real life. The value is not anymore in how perfect they look, but in the fact that it's something that represents the player and something that holds the story. And before going on to the next mechanic, the visible changes after repairing your garments show the evolving relationship between people and the things they meant, especially clothing and textiles. The value is not reduced while the emotional attachment is deepened. In textile research, repair is not only treated as maintenance, it can become a form of care where repeated mending creates a deeper relationship between the player and the garment. And the last mechanic that could be an amazing opportunity for developers would be sewing as spellbinding. The idea of magical fabric is not invented by games. Textile history and folklore often connect thread and garments with symbolic or magical powers. In some historical and folkloric contexts, textile work is connected not only to domestic labor but to knowledge, ritual and power. Magic is closely connected to the creation of textiles. In games, magic is usually something you equip, but you rarely see the visible hint of what spells you can use at any moment. There are some exceptions, of course, like Skyrim, where you can literally see a different animation for each spell in the hand of your character. But what if you could sew a number of spells into your clothes and there would be a different visual representation for each type of spell? A curse could be represented by sewn satin, a healing spell could be represented by a number of specific patterns. Starting from this idea, we have two scenarios. Firstly, you could make your own clothes from scratch, starting from some UVs that would act as the sew patterns. Different spells would be represented by different materials or patches. Secondly, you could bind new spells to your clothes when you level up by sewing them. We are talking again about personalization for each player, a different experience for everyone. The research on the identification of the player with the customized avatar shows that people can relate to their avatars as extensions of themselves, and customization can improve that relationship. Sure, you are creating a limitation that you can only use the spell bound to your clothes, but that is a problem good to have for the decision making inside the game. Sewing as spellbinding, to explain briefly, creates a magic system where fabric has power. Before wrapping it all up, I am aware that sewing might sound like a niche mechanic, something you'd expect in a cozy indie game like Dressmaker or a crafting simulator. Shout out to Dressmaker, by the way. But what we've really been looking at is something much bigger than fabric. It's the idea that games don't have to reduce systems into menus and shortcuts. They can slow things down. They can bring us closer to the act of making. Most modern games don't feel personal. Including a sawing mechanic in your game would be the opposite of that. It would be additive and careful. Every decision would leave a visible trace, nothing would be truly disposable. And more than that, this video is about thinking out of the box. The games that come out nowadays sometimes bore me pretty fast. Maybe the future of game design isn't about adding more systems, faster combat or bigger maps that nobody has the time to explore. Maybe it's about going smaller, slower and more intentional, because sometimes the most powerful mechanics aren't the ones that explode across the screen, they're the ones you stitch together, one careful choice at a time. For more deep dives into the gaming industry, subscribe to this channel, peace and love, and see you next time.